Good afternoon, Wolfram, and thank you very much
Good
for
afternoon.
talking to us today.
Good afternoon, Henry, over to London. Thank you for inviting me once again.
Well, it's great to talk again about the hugely interesting and challenging topic of the China-US-EU axis. And given that I think even Trump has now admitted that Biden has won the election, sort of, I think he's said at least he's going to transfer. I was interested to get your thoughts on what difference you think Biden will make to US policy towards China.
Yeah. So we speak about the transition hopefully taking place in January, on January 20, and on foreign policy, right? With a particular perspective on US-China relations. Yes. Well, many people say there will not be much change. There will be a change in style, of course. Trump was more like an instinctive isolationist, I would say, and Biden has explained in an article already in March, April in the magazine Foreign Policy, U.S. magazine Foreign Policy. He has explained that he wants the U.S. once more to lead the world. So probably this will have to do with some different accents in the policy. Perhaps that's what some people fear, perhaps more warmongering. Some people are saying, some blogs are saying, even some German conservative newspapers saying this is a war cabinet that he has presented with the Department of State and the Department of Defense, etc. But let's see. Some accents will be different towards NATO and towards the EU, certainly. And some towards China will be more or less the same, because the hybrid war in the Trump era was all bipartisan initiatives from Congress, So I'm afraid they will not change too much.
But style can matter, can't it, in terms of the danger of, I suppose, war by accident or just because of brash actions that get out of hand.
Yeah. Well, look, Trump was certainly not the guy of the U.S. military. Obviously not, because the only secretary that ever dared to oppose him was the Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper, when he denied the U.S. military to go into the interior in the Portland riot. You remember that? And he was, of course, one of the first to be dismissed in Trump's final phase. So it's obvious that the U.S. Army and the U.S. military in general, and the FBI and CIA have never been Trump's assets, so to speak. It has always been the Democrats' assets, and that will change some perspectives, definitely. I mean, it will imply that the U.S. military will probably get more money in the future. Trump was reluctant here. He did not launch any new war. He, in fact, dropped the war on the would-be war on Iran in the last minute or last second. And it could well be that the Biden administration would like to go into that direction and regain room, so to speak. Although the world has changed so much, that I doubt that Biden administration can launch new wars anywhere. You will remember that Trump didn't launch any war, while under Obama, Biden, the number of U.S. wars was increased from 2 to 7.
Right.
But this will not happen again.
But one thing I suppose Biden has indicated, as far as I understand, is a more collaborative approach, so that, yes, less unilateralism, so that presumably he could be restrained by European, by his allies.
Yeah, right. I do think that he will be more, perhaps, appeasing again towards the European NATO members. He will be probably more reliable, more rational in his ways. On the other hand, Trump has generated new ways and standards, both against Europe and against China, or vis-a-vis China, vis-a-vis Europe, vis-a-vis Russia, where Biden administration probably will not fall behind, because Trump has pushed more or less the frontiers towards EU and towards China. And this is new room for maneuver for any future US administration. And they probably will try to build on that. On the other hand, yes, he probably has announced to rejoin the Paris Agreement. He has announced to rejoin the WHO. We may hope that he rejoins and continues the Open Skies Agreement with Russia. That is something I would hope that they do that.
What's that agreement? What's the Open Skies Agreement?
The Open Skies is the mutual control, the ability of both countries, Russia and the US, to fly over each other's country and take pictures, of military sites and what's going on there. That has just been canceled or finished by the Trump administration last Sunday a week ago. So let's hope that the Biden administration continues that, as well as the Iran atomic agreement, the JCPOA, joint comprehensive blah 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 of action something. If that would make, in some sense, the world a bit more safe, I would hope, yeah.
And if Biden is more supportive of allies and so forth, I wonder whether the current Australian interaction with China over the photographs and the general breakdown in Chinese-Australians relations will be a situation where the US might come to the aid of Australia or support Australia.
Yeah, well, the entire cabinet of Biden, as is known so far, is a cabinet of old guys. They all have played a role under Obama and Clinton. Obama, Biden, and Clinton, and they are all representatives of the idea of the pivot to the Pacific. Was it pivot? Is it pivot to the Pacific?
Pivot.
Yeah, pivot to the Pacific. So this has all been about circling China with dozens of new military sites, and currently they have 60% of their naval fleet in the South China Sea. So that means the majority of the aircraft carriers are there together with the other ships.
60%. 60%
of the 12, yes. So that means 7 or 8 of the aircraft carriers are currently in the South China Sea. But you see, there's a very differentiated picture in Southeast Asia. You remember the RCEP, what the free trade zone they just launched 2 weeks ago. The regional comprehensive, economic RCEP economic program or something. Look, Australia, New Zealand is part of it. So you have a push into Southeast Asian integration, economic integration without the US, without major agents, even without the EU, but with Japan, with Australia, with New Zealand, and all the others. And on the other hand, the first thing Morrison, the Australian Prime Minister, did the day after the signature there, he flew to Japan and made a demonstrative separate connection. So it's very differentiated. But the point is, I think the US I'm pretty sure that they do that. They will have to do a new analysis of the forces and the factors shaping the future. And that will lead them, hopefully, to conclude that you cannot repeat the situation of the Obama-Biden era. You cannot avoid that the new normal will be the very old historical normal, that China will be number one. Look at the Standard Chartered Bank, the British bank, that do these rankings, international rankings of countries. They see the US not even at number 2 in 2030, they see it at number 3. So
who's number 2?
What? The US
Who's
is number
two?
3 then. Number 2 is India, will be India. I doubt whether this is a realistic thing now, considering the disastrous situation in India under the pandemic. But nevertheless, there will be other countries that will pass the US. The US will certainly be, at best, number 2, probably number 3 in 10 years. So
That's in terms of size of economy.
The size of the GDP, right, yeah. If you go into qualitative things, you look at the factors, how a country like China leverages a small per capita GDP into huge technological and others, educational, etc., military areas, then an analysis factors and potentials of future would be even result in a better forecast for China and in a worse forecast for the US, because look, China produces 35 to 40% of worldwide engineers and natural scientists. That is a potential, while the US have 4 million or so masters and degrees and per year, and the US have, I think, 400 or 450,000 engineers and natural scientists. So that is something where everyone says, I'm reading conservative platforms and newspapers here. Everyone says, who does a factor analysis on all that and an analysis of the potentials comes to the same result. The new normal will be China number 1. And as you see with the re-CEP, China also creates its own environment, Southeast Asian environment, and even Australia, New Zealand, and Japan cannot stay off from that.
So why is Australia biting the hand that feeds it at the moment? Because Australia has relied on China for a long time, hasn't it, in terms of selling its raw materials and so forth. So it seems quite unwise to be giving a hard time to China at this point.
Yeah, it seems currently that even Australia and New Zealand are no longer walking parallel, but divorcing in some sense. My impression is that New Zealand goes a different way, but Morrison, Australia is heterogeneous in itself. There's the state of Victoria that made an extra separate comprehensive agreement with China, interestingly, and Morrison intervened and made a law where the Australian, what is it called, their region, states, I don't know.
States.
The states, can be prevented by the central government to do these international things in the case they say that the national interest of Australia is concerned. I honestly, I do not know exactly what's going on in Australia. Look, Morrison is a person who denies the pandemic, basically. Yes. So he's very close to Trump, has been very close to Trump. He also denied the wildfires, the bushfires, huge bushfires, an incredible historical unique thing that will change the entire global climate by itself from the smoke. We had a large article in my journal just recently on that from an Australian heterodox economist, Lynn Chester. And so this person, was crazy enough to go on vacation. When half of Australia burned, and he was forced to get back from his vacation in New Zealand only by the public opinion, by the newspapers. They really called him home, stay here while half of Australia is burning, and 1.5 trillion animals died, So, well,
Who
You
knows?
you do not know exactly, honestly, but it's a very differentiated picture that Southeast Asia, together with Australia, New Zealand, Japan, shows us currently.
Okay, well, so it's interesting. Imagine you're in charge of this review of the future of the US situation and this analysis of what it looks like over the next 10 years and what US policy should be. What would your recommendations be to a Biden presidency?
Yeah, well, look, if politics were a civilized competitive market, imagine it were, you know. So what would an ex number one, the market leader, when they realize another competitor is getting number one, what would they do? Would they get their pump guns out, go over to their headquarters and shoot them? No, they would not, of course, you know. So market theory would tell them now to make an in-depth analysis, you know, learn, perhaps imitate, or look how the other one does it, you know, and try to learn, imitate. Any evolutionary complexity-oriented market theory would tell the ex number one, now adapt, you know, disrupt yourself, reinvent yourself, you know, change your strategy, do it better.
Trump would claim that he did exactly that.
Yeah, but he had a completely different understanding. He had a completely wrong understanding of what the economy is. You know, his thinking is that of a deal maker where what he gains is always the loss of the other. You know, so static, a simplistic understanding of economy in general and of international trade in particular. He had not the slightest idea of that economy and economic exchange and interaction is something that creates future spaces, you know, and is in that way a win-win thing. Yeah? And then you have to cooperate and deal and bargain on the distribution of the future gains. That is the point, you know, and that would be the point to deal with China. Yeah, it's not that China has an interest in a completely deindustrialized USA. You know, no one has an interest in a USA that is completely deindustrialized and has no competencies anymore. And even the dollar and the Wall Street is going down. You know, in the CEP, the dollar is not even mentioned as a currency of trade. Did you know that?
Now that is a turn up.
Yeah, the dollar is out, you know, so it's everywhere that the dollar is going down, and not even Wall Street can attract anymore as it was for decades the general surplus money capital from all over the world. You know, a lot of this money goes to the stock exchanges of Shenzhen now and Hong Kong a bit and Shanghai.
Can I just take you back, because you said, you know, the US needs to disrupt its model, and then you said the Trump way of disruption was not the right way, though probably understood by people in the Rust Belt, obviously, who'd seen the losses.
Yeah, that's
but
a tragedy.
What's the disruptive strategy you would suggest?
Well, I would say develop a strategy of reindustrialization. Get yourself a Marshall Plan 2.0. You know, you remember, Washington remembers what it was once, you know, a Marshall Plan with which they brought up Europe, Western Europe. Huh? Why not apply the same idea to themselves? You know, so after 4 decades of neoliberal dequalification of the state, I would say, get yourself a Marshall Plan, upgrade yourself. You know, on the other hand, it is a plutocracy. It is a 1% or 0.1% ruling situation, their ruler's situation, as long as they cannot redistribute from top to bottom, nothing will happen, of course, So I would recommend them a number of things for upgrading and becoming more qualified and competent in terms of collective action, and Biden will learn and will start from collective action with the pandemic. That's what he announced, and there he has a huge potential of scientists brought together, and this is the basic idea. Look, generalize this idea as you start, Joe Biden, as you start with the pandemic. Generalize the same idea to reindustrialization, requalification, education, health, food safety and quality, etc. So upgrade your country.
Is this a sort of variant of the Green New Deal, effectively?
That would be something like that. Yes, exactly. Otherwise, the other way will be going down and getting ever more aggressive in order to prevent that. But you cannot prevent that. You have to take your own narratives serious, the narratives of the market, reinvent yourself, make a disruptive new analysis. And that is exactly, by the way, a person from Wall Street. You might know the name Ray Dalio. Ray Dalio is the CEO and founder of one of the largest hedge funds, Bridgewater. He had a huge interview in the Financial Times 3 weeks ago or so, and he exactly says that you cannot prevent the ongoing change of the global structure. So U.S. learn, and he says, I take my money to Shanghai and Shenzhen. At least I am clever enough and smart enough to divide my money between Wall Street and London and Shenzhen and China. But he has become a big critic of what Washington currently is, So these guys are going away. They're taking their money away if the US doesn't learn from the current situation. It is
These
a
will
tragedy.
be the people, the sort of typical neoliberal hate figures that have no, I suppose, loyalty to the US.
Look, this person, he has written a book. He has written a book on his experience in Southeast Asia. He's not just a ruthless person who just goes where the profit is. He has published things. He has very clever, smart ideas on he's thinking on his nation and how they can upgrade and rebuild. And he's also thinking about the global ecosystem, about the pandemic, climate change, food, health, education. So in some sense, he doesn't say I leave the US, he just says, if you do not learn from Southeast Asia, it's not only China, with the pandemic, you see all the Southeast Asian countries have done most things right, okay? And China is another extreme. They did it extremely successful in a sense that we cannot imitate, of course. But these people just say, start being realistic. And that is not only Ray Dalio and 2-3 other figures from Wall Street. It's also famous diplomats from Southeast Asia, from Singapore, Kishore Mahbubani, who had that fantastic book out, Has China Won? And he says, when do the US start learning from Southeast Asia, When do they start understanding us, that we have other ideas, we have other ideas of what we require from our governments. We have other ideas of democracy. Take us serious. And another famous political scientist also at the University of Singapore is Parakana. He has written half a dozen of books, and the last one was early this year, Our Asian Future or so. Our Asian Future, that was the German title. It has been translated into German. He says the same thing, can the US make a U-turn in recognizing us? Otherwise, we will go our way and without the USA,
And do you think, lastly, shortly, briefly, do you think Biden will listen to this sort of advice?
I would say we all should push the idea that they get together an truly international conference, so to speak. Biden came up with the idea to make, what did he say, that a global summit for democracy, and that was already against Russia, China, Iran, and so on. Why not pushing the idea, getting together an exchange council, so to speak, with scientists or people like, Kishore Mahbubani has been the representative of Singapore for many years in the Security Council of the UN. So he's both a political scientist at the University of Singapore and an experienced diplomat. Bring these people together, and US, Washington, please listen to the people of the world. Africa is industrializing for the first time, on a broad scale, with whose help? China is industrializing them, while the US only sends their troops. Yeah, that it doesn't work any longer. The world has changed, and let's hope and beg really that in Washington, Biden learns from listening to people. What you remember the détente policy when in the late 60s, early 70s, John F. Kennedy was the first in early 60s to say, let's stop. That is an automatic spiral. We spiral into down and down and down. That must be stopped, And Willy Brandt, you might remember the name, was the first détente policy person who said, let's start, just stop the Thucydides trap, having distrust answered by distrust, and let's change that spiral upwards, and that starts with just giving something with the risk of being betrayed, but starting giving some trust into the others, opening our, the vizier, or we would say, does it make sense in English? Okay, and start talking with each other and give something in advance that we hopefully get back very soon. You may do that stepwise, but that is the peaceful coexistence way to proceed, peaceful coexistence 2.0, rather than the Cold War 2.0. I do hope that the rationale of war and Thucydides trap between, you remember, Athens and Sparta in ancient times, can be stopped indeed. Biden as a person seems to me to be a very thoughtful person. And I'm pretty sure that he's able to listen. He is, as a person, is able to listen to other people, and perhaps listen to people from Singapore, for instance. If he wouldn't listen to people from Beijing, So his surrounding, I am not really sure, and also of course the many millions of people, 70 million people that have voted for Trump. Trump got nearly 11 million votes more than 2016. That is, of course, something that Biden has to consider and to obey in some sense. But in that sense, the country is not only divided, deeply divided, but also in a way dumb and without the slightest rules that we consider culture. So that I'm not very optimistic. Unless Biden goes to the front, takes the risk of not being reelected, losing perhaps these Midwest people who think the world is 6,000 years old, because in the Old Testament they count the generations, and then they say the world is 6,000 years old. Look, with these people, what can you do with these people? And these are millions and millions and millions. You have to really reinvent the entire country and the entire US culture. Otherwise, I would not exclude the option that we go into a disaster, end of history as end of humankind. Then, no?
Well, I was hoping to end on a more positive note, but let's go back to your previous thing that hopefully he'll listen. Thank you very much, Wolfram.
Okay.
That's great.
Thank you, Henry. Thank you.